Reprise du débat, resuming the debate. The honourable member for Kitchener-Conestoga.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise in the House today to speak to Bill C-58 and, in the words of our Prime Minister, shed some light on this less than true statement that members opposite have been making regarding this legislation. First, let's look at the mandate letter that was given to the Minister of Finance in November of 2015. The Prime Minister writes, quote, "We have promised Canadians a government that will bring real change both in what we do and how we do it." Quote, end of quote. Well, that sure has changed, Madam Speaker. This Information Commissioner has been clear. This bill sets us back decades in terms of openness and transparency. But I'll share more of the Information Commissioner's thoughts a little bit later in my remarks. The Prime Minister goes on to write in his mandate letter to the Finance Minister, quote, "I expect Canadians to hold us accountable for delivering on these commitments, and I expect all ministers to do their part." And later he writes, "We have also committed to set a higher bar for openness and transparency in government." End of quote. Madam Speaker, there's never been a perfect example of how this government is all style and no substance better than this one, focusing on rhetoric and platitudes more than actual substance. This has to take the cake, Madam Speaker. The Liberals love to throw around terms like openness and transparency, when in reality, they are, through this legislation, making it harder for Canadians to access information under this government. But as you know, Madam Speaker, often the debates here in the House can be tainted with partisan political positioning, so rather than sharing my thoughts on the legislation, please allow me to read into the record parts of the Information Commissioner of Canada's report titled, quote, "Failing to Strike the Right Balance for Transparency," end quote. The Commissioner states, quote, "The Liberal government was elected on a platform of openness and transparency, promising to renew Canadians' trust in their government. At the beginning of its mandate, it committed to lead a review of the outdated Access to Information Act to enhance the openness of government. Initial policy changes from the government, such as the elimination of all fees except the $5 application fee, were early indicators of positive change. Like many Canadians, I was hopeful that the government would follow through on its promise and introduce significant improvements to the Act. Just before Parliament's 2017 summer break, the government tabled Bill C-58, which amends the Access to Information Act. In short, Bill C-58 fails to deliver." End quote. These are the Information Commissioner's words, Madam Speaker. They're not mine. And I hope that members of the Liberal government will not be disregarding the comments of an independent, nonpartisan officer of Parliament. She goes on to write, quote, "The government promised the bill would ensure the Act applies to the Prime Minister's and Ministers' offices appropriately. It does not. The government promised the bill would apply appropriately to administrative institutions that support Parliament and the courts. It does not. The government promised the bill would empower the Information Commissioner to order the release of government information. It does not. Rather than advancing the access to information rights, Bill C-58 would instead result in a regression of existing rights." End quote. She goes on to say, quote, "It imposes added obligations on requesters making a request, adds new grounds for institutions to decline to act in response to requests. It reintroduces the possibility of various fees, and for some information replaces the right of access and independent oversight with proactive disclosure. It allows the government to decide what information Canadians can obtain, rather than letting Canadians decide for themselves." End of quote. Might I add, Madam Speaker, that this is the Liberal philosophy. Government knows best what's good for Canadians. It's insulting, it's elitist, and it's arrogant. More from the Information Commissioner's report. Quote, "It also introduces an oversight model where the Commissioner is not truly empowered to order the disclosure of information, and it adds burdensome stages to the investigation process that may lead to delays. It does not take advantage of any of the benefits of a true order-making model. Recent reviews of the Access to Information Act from myself and the House of Commons Standing Committee to Access to Information, Privacy and Ethics have proposed amendments that are required to modernize the Act. These recommendations have largely been ignored in Bill C-58. End of quote. So much for consultation. So much for openness and transparency. So much for sunny ways. So much for sunshine being the best disinfectant. Madam Speaker, had the changes the Liberals are ramming through today been in effect in the early 2000s, we would never have found out about the Liberal sponsorship scandal. It makes you wonder, Madam Speaker, what exactly is the goal of this government in introducing such archaic legislation? What do they have to hide today? The government acts as if the measures it's taking regarding proactive disclosure in this piece of legislation is somehow groundbreaking. But the reality is that the majority of information was already available, either online or through access to information under previous governments. The Liberals are trying to buy off Canadians with promising to proactively disclose how much a minister's steak dinner costs, while taking away the right to request information that could be embarrassing for the government. They actually give the rights to departments to deny access to information requests that they find to be vexatious or made in bad faith. And who gets to make the judgment, Madam Speaker, as to what is vexatious or what is made in bad faith? By the Liberal government, of course. Madam Speaker, I've been serving in opposition for over 2 years now, and one does not have to look too far into the past to see how thin-skinned this government is when it comes to asking them tough questions. We can look at the Finance Minister as an example. For the past several weeks, on this side of the House, I've been asking for the Finance Minister to open up and be honest with Canadians regarding his assets. What does the Finance Minister do? He threatens to sue members of Parliament, members of the opposition. Mr. Speaker, one has to wonder how many journalists and Canadians will be threatened similarly by the Finance Minister if he thinks their access to information request is vexatious or made in bad faith. Enough about Liberals, Mr. Speaker. Madam Speaker, let's look at our Conservative government's accomplishments regarding access to information. Our government launched the Action Plan on Open Government 2.0 on November 6, 2014. The action plan specified ways the federal government was working towards creating more open and transparent government, while maximizing the sharing of government information and data. Key accomplishments include: 1. The Next Generation Open Data Portal that was launched in June 2013. This new portal was built based on broad public consultations with users to define new capabilities, and enhancements were made to expand the availability of high-value data, improve data integrity, enrich the usability of the site, facilitate intuitive discovery of data, and increase user engagement. Second, modernization of access to information services. These online services were launched in 2013 to enable Canadians to search completed ATI requests across all federal departments through a single search interface, and to submit new access to information requests by way of the web. Third, in 2013, we issued a new open government license for all levels of government in order to remove barriers to the reuse of published government data and information, regardless of the origin. This license has also been adopted by several provincial governments and municipalities across the country. We introduced a new government-wide web portal at canada.ca that improves intuitive navigation features to help Canadians find the information they need more quickly and easily. The portal enables users to quickly complete tasks and features government-wide search capabilities, better use of social media, and optimized content for mobile devices. And in February 2014, we held the largest competitive open data hackathon in Canadian history, bringing together over 900 developers, students, and open data enthusiasts from across Canada to develop over 100 innovative applications using federal data. Our Conservative government was also promoting transparency in public institutions and supporting taxpayers and hardworking Canadians through our support for the Private Member's Bill C-377, an act to amend the Income Tax Act, labour organizations. This important legislation will help ensure greater transparency and accountability for labour unions by requiring them to publish their financial disclosures online for Canadians to examine. But we know, Madam Speaker, these changes have been reversed. Madam Speaker, no government is better at patting itself on the back than this current Liberal government, but it's clear that while this government has been pumping out talking points about openness and transparency, the reality is they are taking Canada down a very dark path. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Questions and comments? Questions et commentaires? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary of the Government House Leader.
Yes, Madam Speaker, what the member's last statement is just not true. You know, the legislation does bring forward some new measures that ensure more transparency and more accountability. That's not a speaking point, Madam Speaker. That is the reality of the legislation that we're actually debating. Many would question in terms of why it is the Conservatives have actually chosen to vote against the legislation that will provide that, whether it's through ministerial mandate letters, which is a new provision where former government, Stephen Harper, there was no obligation whatsoever on that Prime Minister to table the mandate letters. Mandate letters are significant in the sense that they provide Canadians as a whole a sense of what is happening in specific departments. There's empowering and enabling the Commissioner to request reports. This is something of significance. The Commissioner will actually have teeth. My question to the member is, does he really believe that this legislation does not ensure that there's more transparency and accountability?
For Kitchener-Conestoga.
Speaker, that question is very easy to answer. Yes, I do believe that this bill makes it less possible for Canadians to access the information they want. And Madam Speaker, we've referred to the mandate letters multiple times today in this House. I would like to ask my colleague, what about the mandate letters on electoral reform or door-to-door delivery, or the letter to the Finance Minister in which he was charged with the responsibility of not only doing what was in the law, but to go beyond that and do what is perceived to be correct. And here we have the Finance Minister having been charged in 2 different occasions by the Ethics Commissioner with a fine, and the Finance Minister paid the fine, thereby admitting his guilt on these matters. And now we also find out, Madam Speaker, that there are multiple situations where the Finance Minister, in spite of his constant rhetoric saying that he's worked with the Ethics Commissioner from day one, it took him 2 years to disclose the fact that he had a villa in France. It took him 2 years to disclose the fact that he had assets in a numbered company out of province when he and his company are living here in Ontario. Madam Speaker, the Finance Minister's mandate letter is not worth the paper it's written on.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Member for Port Moody, Coquitlam.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank the honourable member for his speech, and I wanted to talk a little bit about disclosure. And New Democrats don't have a problem with proactive disclosure per se, but we strongly maintain the Access to Information Act is not an appropriate legislative vehicle for publishing information. The Act should improve the ability of Canadians to request information that the government chooses not to publish. So I'm wondering if the honourable member could comment about information that the government chooses not to publish.
The Honourable Member for Kitchener-Conestoga.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. I want to thank my colleague for the question. I made a comment in my remarks about the fact that any department or any minister can simply refuse to answer an access to information request on the basis of the request being vexatious or forget the actual words now. But there were 2 different criteria that allow them not to answer the question. But Madam Speaker, again, it's not important what I think. Let's listen to the Information Commissioner from 2007 to 2008, Mr. Robert Marleau. He said there is no one in government departments to review what they choose not to publish. And I think this gets to the heart of my colleague's question. There is no one in government departments to review what they choose not to publish, and I think this is contrary to the principle of the Act. They put the Commissioner out of the loop. If you requested briefing notes and parts of them had been blanked out, you had someone to appeal to before. This is no longer the case. You can't even ask the court. It's a step forward and then 2 steps back. Thank you, Madam Speaker.